Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week and an awesome weekend. Got some cool stuff to go over today. I think you're going to hopefully find some of this. It's been on the news, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper to discuss it, as well as some other topics that we always discuss. The first thing I'll discuss is a little bit about sports, of course. As you know, we're in the midst of the NBA playoffs. And as I mentioned on social media a few days ago, this was one of the greatest meltdowns in the history of sports. The San Antonio Spurs were up 29 points in the third quarter against the New York Knicks, and unfortunately lost the lead and ended up losing the game. It was just a colossal meltdown from all aspects. The players made mental errors. I hate saying it, but I think they got nervous, and kind of the term for that in sports is choked. And I thought their coaching staff showed their inexperience. They have a good young coach in Mitch Johnson, but he showed his inexperience and not really getting his team to refocus and do some things that they should have done that they didn't do. So that series is now 3-1 in favor of the Knicks. Game 5 is tomorrow at 8:30 in San Antonio. It should be interesting. One of two things are going to happen tomorrow. Either San Antonio is going to come out with a vengeance, have their home crowd fuel them and win tomorrow, or this loss is going to so devastate them that the Knicks are going to roll them. So it should be interesting to see. This has been a very entertaining series from a neutral standpoint. All the games have been close. In fact, San Antonio has been ahead in every game, but unfortunately they're losing 3-1 right now. And these are best of 7 series. So all the Knicks need to do is win one more game. This also proves the old adage that we always talk about, especially in the NBA, that it's really hard for inexperienced teams, no matter how great their skill level is, to win a championship. They have to kind of go through the fire and learn by experience. And I think San Antonio's learning that. Arguably, San Antonio has more talent than the Knicks, but they have tremendous youth, and that's shown in these key moments. So that's all for basketball. For basketball fans, watch tomorrow night's game. Hopefully it'll be another good one. Changing to our real estate format, I wanted to go over some more data today with everybody. It's kind of some interesting things I'm finding. As you know, I always use Hunters Creek as a focal point. So Hunters Creek inventory as of this morning was up to 41 homes, ranging from $399,000 to $900,000. The positive news on that is inventory level over the past few weeks has started to increase in Hunters Creek. Prior to that, it had been fluctuating, but it had actually dropped a little bit. And this time of the year, historically it goes up, so hopefully this trend will continue. As I've mentioned previously, a lot of our irregularity and trend assessment has been tremendously affected by what's going on in our foreign affairs, specifically the conflict in Iran. And also a lot of the mixed signals we're getting economically, and also the Iranian conflict has affected our not only our comfort level, but more importantly, inflation. Inflation now for 2026 has gotten over 4% up to this point, which is a lot higher than our economists want, and it's actually even higher than we had during the worst times of the COVID. So let's see what happens. Gas came down somewhat in the past week, but the forecast for gas is very erratic because gas could get worse before it gets better. I'm hoping it doesn't because it affects us all, but it's a good possibility to go back up again because the conflict in the Middle East goes from A to Z. According to President Trump, we're near to a peace treaty, and then the next day we have an increase in bombing. I personally don't think we're that close to a peace treaty. I hope I'm wrong. I think that the Iranians have a lot of resolve, and I think their powers to be there are not going to agree to a peace. I think they've been kind of stringing us along. And we've taken, in my opinion, kind of a unusual method. We negotiate in the media, and typically on items of this substance, when you're talking about wars and all these major ramifications with the Straits of Hormuz having blockades and all that stuff, that we don't announce what our intentions are. But like this week, for example, President Trump and his Secretary of Defense, who I call the Major Dum-Dum, Pete Hegseth, they announce when we're going to increase our bombing. I mean, who tells the enemy when they're going to do things? You do it. And I think most of our political leaders, regardless of whether they're for or against war, feel that the Iranians are kind of stringing us along, and with this latest catastrophe with the Black Hawk helicopter being shot down, that we need to increase our aggressive nature to show that we mean business. Even if we shouldn't have gone to war initially, which a lot of people feel that way, we're in the midst of it now, so now we can't look weak. We have to show strength, and strength means that we have to, if they do something, we have to do it on a lot more of a significant basis. I'm not a war person, but you have to show strength. Otherwise, they lose respect for you quickly. And especially when we're dealing with a culture like Iran, where there's not the same respect or fear of death like there is in Western countries, you have to take a completely different approach. So that's all impacting real estate, as I mentioned. So hopefully the inventory, the inventory news is good news. Also, some additional positive news inventory-wise in Hunters Creek. Over the past 30 days, there were 16 single-family home closings, which was an increase of 19% over the same time frame in 2025. That was a great number. Hopefully this trend will continue as business for the first 4.5 months in Hunters Creek over the same time frame was pretty much completely flat compared to 2025. In fact, for the first 5 months of 2026, closings for that period were just under 2% more than 2025. So they were, quite flat. Now, statewide, we had slightly different statistics. For comparative purposes, home prices statewide in May of 2026 were up 1.7% compared to May of 2025. However, the number of homes for sale dropped 9.9%. Now, the median sales price was $395,595, and the median days on the market for sold homes was 69 days. So that gives you an overview of how the whole state is, because obviously every market's different and it doesn't mirror the exact state all the time. Sometimes Orlando will be stronger than other parts of the state, and sometimes it may not be. So it really just depends on what part of the state. So it's interesting to kind of compare the state with how we're doing in the Central Florida area. Now, one thing I did want to spend some time on, which I think is very important and should evoke a lot of discussion among our residents, are the property tax changes that were proposed by Governor DeSantis and finally voted on within our Florida State House and Senate. And so what they're going to put forward that's going to appear on the November 3rd ballot is what I call major. This is probably the most significant legislative change that I've seen in however long I can remember, which has been years. And what are its potential ramifications? Well, let me give a little information what I'm talking about. And I'm sure you've probably either seen or read, you've either seen it on the news or read about it online. But let me cut to the nuts and bolts and give you some accurate information. As I mentioned, it will be on the November 3rd ballot. In order for these changes to become law regarding the property tax changes, 60% of the voters need to vote for it to become law. So that's pretty significant. That means that 6 out of 10 voters would need to vote yes on this ballot amendment. So that's a pretty high threshold. But let's just say they do. What does that mean exactly? Well, it would increase the homestead exemption for people that own, obviously, a residence that they've registered as a homestead property. It would increase their exemption by $50,000 in 2026, $150,000 in 2027, and $250,000 in 2028. So that's significant. When you think about it, if the median sales price, let's just say hypothetically, is $400,000, and a $400,000 home would probably assess on average maybe a $300 and $300 and a quarter, and out of that assessed value, it's going to increase in 2026 by 50,000, and then increase by much larger multiples in future years. That's going to reduce your tax bill dramatically. And just to give you an idea of how property taxes in Florida contribute to statewide taxes, property taxes in Florida account for about 74% of local tax collections, of which homestead tax collection is a huge segment. So out of that 74%, the largest chunk of that is homestead taxes. And so what are some hidden tax changes that will occur if these changes go through? Well, besides individual homeowners that have homestead homes getting these big tax savings, some hidden tax changes that are really not being mentioned and have a lot of impact will be that higher net worth individuals and corporations are going to be huge beneficiaries of this, because commercial real estate would have lower property taxes. So what's commercial real estate? Well, anything that's going to be used for commercial use. So when you think about all these huge office buildings, Walt Disney World property, SeaWorld property, Universal theme park, these are multi-billion-dollar corporations, and they're probably the last ones that need all these tax benefits, but yet they're going to benefit from this significantly too. So that's going to be another form of tax revenue that is not going to go to the local jurisdictions. For example, Walt Disney World is primarily in Orange County, so that's going to impact Orange County tax revenues. Some other categories that you won't hear as much about that also will get benefits are vacation homes and investment property. So vacation homes are defined as people typically that don't live in Florida that own a secondary home in Florida that they use for basically vacation purposes. They may be what we call snowbirds and come down here for 2 to 3 to 4 months a year. Or another category would be investment properties. Investment properties, the easiest example is people that buy a home in Florida and they rent it out. And that can be in the form of a long-term rental property, which you're probably more familiar with, where you might see an adjacent property in your community that's rented out to tenants that rent it out for a year basis. That's a very common practice. And then you have the short-term rental market, which in The Orlando Kissimmee area is big. You see a lot of those properties, for example, in West 192. You'll see them in Davenport, portions of Claremont, areas in those communities. And so those properties are rented out like on a weekly basis, for example. They're kind of like a glorified hotel. Airbnbs is another category of that. So those individuals will also get tax savings. So all this is going to impact how our local government functions, because they're not going to collect initially the revenues that they've been accustomed to, and this change is going to happen quickly. So I'd like to impart kind of what I call a couple old adages. And unfortunately, they're really true in all aspects of life, especially when you're in a capitalistic society. The rich get richer and the poor fall further behind. And what I mean by that is, statistically, and you can't argue this regardless of what your feelings are about what the government should or shouldn't do for folks, about your political affiliation, the income disparity in our society over the past 40 years, regardless of which party is in power, has continued to be larger and larger. So what that's basically done is it's reduced the extent of our middle class, and our less affluent people, the more moderate income folks, they've continued to struggle even more, because people that are wealthy, they're doing great. The stock market's doing great for the most part. And the people that aren't doing well, the disparity between them and the people that are wealthy has increased dramatically over 40 years. And that's not a good trend in a democratic society. I'm not here to tell you the byproducts of that. I'm just telling you that when you have such a gap between the haves and the have-nots, it's not a good thing, and it's not how our society was initially founded by our founding fathers 250 years ago. In fact, we're going to celebrate our 250th anniversary this year, so it's a good time to think about these things. So when you talk about these trends, it is speculated that the net reduction to local tax revenues by these changes could be as much as $4.6 billion in the first year and $8.4 billion in the second year. I mean, those are mind-boggling numbers. So think about it. Let's just say, I'll use you as an example. Let's say you make a solid income. So let's say you make $75,000 a year. And then all of a sudden you get a notice in your paycheck that your pay is being reduced by $15,000 or $20,000 to take effect at your next pay period. Well, I think you would kind of react in a very concerned and negative fashion. You'd say, well, how am I going to make up this shortfall? So our local government is going to be faced with this on a monumental scale. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to operate. So how will this impact local government? Well, this is all speculation at this point, but in all likelihood, it could impact crucial services. And what do I mean by that? Well, it could impact police, firefighters, disaster response, and of course, the most needy in our population. And, that could affect not only the quality of life, but people's safety. Right now, when people have a major problem, if it's a crime or if it's a health issue, they call the police, they call emergency services. If it's a weather crisis, they call disaster relief. And a lot of these things, initially, they're going to have their budgets cut, so something's got to give. I know the answer will be, well, they need to be more efficient, and maybe that's true to a degree. But whether that's true or not, if you feel that they've been inefficient for all these years, they're not all of a sudden going to wake up and be efficient. And let's face it, unfortunately, the nature of government, with all its layers of bureaucracy, is never going to be as efficient as a well-oiled private corporation entity, because private corporations have the ability to make change pretty quickly, and they don't have to go through all the regulatory rigmarole and go through all the layers of bureaucracy and get approvals. Those things just don't happen that quickly. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. And that's kind of scary. So ask yourself the question, where or how would this revenue be replaced or modified? So from what I've read, in my own opinion, and it's just my opinion, and you might say, well, who cares what Marty Kaiser thinks? Well, this is my podcast, and this is why I give my opinions. The most likely answer, I think, initially would be a very large increase in our state sales tax. It's speculated that that could go over 15%. So that's a very large increase. So what does that mean, and how would it impact? Well, that would impact all consumers, but it would have a particularly larger impact on residents that do not own real estate, and in many instances have less assets or financial stability. And the reason being is the people that own real estate, they're getting tax benefits now by these changes. So they might be robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. But if you're saving a couple $1,000s in your taxes, property taxes, you're probably not going to necessarily pay that much in additional sales tax. So the net gain to a homestead person hopefully would be on the positive level. But if you're a renter, you're not saving anything in property taxes. So now all you're going to do is pay. And a lot of sales tax items are items that you need. They're not what I call elective items. So basically, that would, I'll give you an instance where it could affect our state economy. Let's say you live up in North Florida and you border either Georgia or Alabama, for example. Well, if once you learn the ramifications of the sales tax increases, and then you determine how much people are paying in sales tax in Georgia or Alabama, maybe when you start to make a large purchase, you might buy it in Georgia or Alabama, which would impact your local economy. For example, if you're going to buy a vehicle, well, if the taxes are way lower in Alabama or Georgia, and it's less than an hour drive for you, maybe, you're probably going to consider buying a vehicle in those states. It would also impact you if you were buying a computer. You might buy it making sure that you're buying it out of state. Or a big electronic item like a big widescreen TV, which everybody likes buying nowadays. Well, they're not inexpensive. So that's another thing that you may buy in an adjacent state. So the ramifications and the cumulative effect of these changes, they're not all being discussed right now, but these are things that people need to think about. And they're real. They're not just somebody trying to get people all fired up about this, but these are things that need analysis and discussion. So I wanted to bring that up, because these could impact all residents in Florida. And I believe that our residents need to be aware of these things and carefully think about the ramifications. You may be a person that thinks it's a good thing to make these changes and you're going to vote yes for it. Or you may think it's not going to be a good thing and you're going to vote no for it. But in either event, you need to educate yourself on how this is going to not only affect you on a personal level, but how it's going to affect the state. Because it's always easy just to look at your own situation, and obviously you have to look at yourself and your family. But as your residents in Florida, and assuming you're not planning on moving out of the state, you have to decide how that's going to affect the overall lifestyle of people, because how your neighbors are impacted indirectly impacts you. Do people complain more? Do they struggle more? Does it increase homelessness? Does it increase less affluent? Does it increase crime due to less police protection? There's a lot of things to think about. So, I would request that people do think about these things. I think it would be helpful and should be available that our elected officials, both on a local and a state level, have town hall meetings, and they should address this particular issue along with other things that people may have questions about. But this issue in particular, is coming to the polls in less than 5 months, so information needs to be given. And regardless of the political officials' political views of their party, they need to be answering these questions. And remember, your vote counts. Every vote counts. And so when you complain about things, the only way you're going to affect change is to have your vote. And the only way that you're going to make an informed vote is to educate yourself on these issues. So I highly recommend that if you have these type of meetings in your local jurisdiction, you attend them. And if you don't have anything scheduled, you call your local representatives and have your friends and neighbors do that and say, we'd like you to come to our area and have a meeting about this. And they're getting paid to represent you as citizens, so that's the least that our elected officials can do. Remember, your vote counts more than ever. Lastly, going to a little bit of a national level, if you remember, I spoke over the last couple podcasts about Bill Pulte being nominated to be the Director of National Intelligence. And I was saying I was scratching my head that this guy is grossly and patently unqualified for that position, and he was going to be an attack dog for President Trump. And I said the hearing should be interesting if he ever comes before the Senate and Congress. He was going in as an interim director, so I believe he could bypass the confirmation hearings for up to 6 months. Well, anyway, there was so much negative feedback about him, especially in the media, that believe it or not, it was announced earlier this week that his nomination was going to be pulled, and a gentleman named Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, was nominated by President Trump to be the next Director of National Intelligence. This was done because President Trump had been under intense pressure to move on from his decision to appoint Bill Pulte. So that's, in my opinion, that's great news. I can't give you much about Jay Clayton's qualifications, good or bad, but at least he's got a legal background. I don't know if he's got any national intelligence experience, but it's better than being the director of real estate. Now, the scary thing about that is that President Trump appointed him in the first place, but at least in this particular case, he bowed to public and media pressure and got rid of this totally unqualified person. So I'm thrilled to report that we don't have to worry about Mr. Pulte taking office. So that's all I'll say about national politics today. Think about the points I brought up about the property tax changes. For the basketball fans, enjoy Game 5 this weekend. Everybody enjoy themselves this weekend. Stay warm because it's going to be a hot weekend. Be safe. And this is Marty Kaiser out.